Stories don't just entertain, they cut through the noise, shape perception, and move people to act. Rob Biesenbach frames storytelling as a practical, almost scientific tool that anyone can use to win hearts, change minds, and get results in business and life. He threads together performance craft, clear structure, and a principled approach to human connection, showing that well-told stories are not a garnish on a presentation but the engine that makes messages land. The book begins by reframing storytelling as accessible, learnable, and repeatable, something ordinary professionals can harness to influence opinions, guide decisions, and influence outcomes in a world saturated with data and noise. Storytelling, at its core, combines emotional resonance with behavioral impact. It is the bridge between what you know and what other people feel and do as a result of what they hear from you. From there, the path moves from the big ideas to the lived practice of shaping and safeguarding powerful stories. Emotion isn't a garnish, it's a core tool for humanizing leaders and firing up audiences. When leaders show feeling in a calibrated way, it can spark a shared catharsis and a sense of connection that unlocks trust. The book offers vivid examples to illuminate this point. A drumbeat moment of tears on the stage in a near-death corporate scenario reveals how emotion, when used responsibly, can catalyze relief, solidarity, and a renewed sense of purpose. The power of emotion grows when it's tethered to authenticity. Steve Jobs and Tim Cook serve as case studies of emotionally honest leadership. Cook's public commitments to workers' welfare, environmental stewardship, and accessibility demonstrate that audiences respond to genuine, well-placed emotion, even if it isn't meticulously scripted in advance. Authenticity isn't something you fake. It's the surest way to endear leaders to their people and make messages land in a crowded information landscape. The practical how-to follows. Center your narratives on why you do what you do. What do you love about your work? What makes you excited to get up in the morning? How do you improve other people's lives? This focus on purpose creates emotional access points that let listeners feel the higher meaning behind the work. Strategies expand beyond purpose alone. Lean into loyalty. Stories about colleagues who rely on you or customers who depend on you. Appeal to pride through shared heritage, quality, or community. Celebrate heroes by drawing lessons from admired figures. And, crucially, get personal, sharing passions, family, and intimate relationships to illuminate values. Modesty isn't a barrier to authentic storytelling. Fear of vulnerability is the real obstacle. A leader who leads with humanity becomes not merely a person who speaks, but a person who others want to follow, the kind of leader whose messages cut through data and land in hearts. The book then tests these ideas in concrete examples from Stories at Work, showing how stories serve different aims. In Estella and the Candy Factory, the goal is alignment and brand trust, achieved through storytelling that foregrounds quality for both internal teams and external audiences. Can You Hear Me Knocking? Follows a sales leader who leans into vulnerability by recounting her early fear of cold calls, thereby building credibility and persuading skeptics through shared humanity. 30 Angry Men presents a new CEO who reframes a dry, technical message with a personal narrative about his early days, turning a hostile town hall into a more receptive space and signaling a genuine commitment to the workforce. Death at the Grand Canyon demonstrates how a single, vivid narrative about a tragedy can override policy fatigue and clarify the rationale behind safety instructions. Sometimes a flyer, simple, direct, can be more powerful than a multi-million-dollar campaign. Rumble in the Jungle shows that even stories about celebrated figures like Muhammad Ali can carry potent lessons, though they may lose staying power if they're not anchored in relatable struggles. Family Treasures argues for emotionally resonant, customer-focused storytelling in B2B contexts, where sentimental value and human connection often outshine mere features. These case studies aren't random, they're a bridge. They point toward a practical, step-by-step guide for crafting stories for every kind of occasion. Emotion, when used with care and honesty, can elevate leadership communication and help audiences connect with messages on a human level, making stories stick beyond dry data. With that groundwork, the book moves into more precise craft. How to focus a story so it lands with impact. How to focus your story dives into the discipline of pruning away clutter so the message lands cleanly. What you leave out matters as much as what you include. The author offers 7 concrete pruning principles. Start with a goal, ensuring every story supports a clear message or objective. Eliminate the bit players, centering on one main character and perhaps one supporting figure, to avoid diffuse focus. Avoid tangents, treating the story like a straight line from base to top. Stick to clear turning points, choosing one defining moment to anchor the narrative. Details, and sensory impressions. Distinguish the essential specifics from the noise. Cut the exposition, starting in the middle of action and weaving background as needed. It's okay to lie, sort of. Compress, reorder, or omit details for flow, as long as the audience would still recognize the truth. The author pushes readers to ruthless refinement. Be concise, know your line for detail saturation, and trim until the story remains powerful and immediate. Even with focus, stories must be kept honest. Chapter after chapter emphasizes preserving the integrity of stories, even in organizational settings where constraints bite. Not Your Grandfather's Anniversary Celebration reframes a traditional company anniversary as a mass appeal narrative focused on clients and their stories, with the firm's role kept concise. The governance note is practical. Limit the approval chain to a small editorial board to protect the tail from bureaucratic dilution. A Deloitte video example reinforces the same point. A narrowly focused story about one character facing one crisis can resonate deeply because universal truths, crises, fears, endurance, speak to people more than broad, generic claims about a firm's capabilities. The takeaway is trust. Audiences will accept a narrowly targeted story if it communicates a clear truth about human experience and invites viewers to imagine themselves in that moment. The upshot is practical. Defend a story through internal negotiations by prioritizing major pillars: character, conflict, stakes, emotion, letting go of minor details, and citing supporting evidence from the science of storytelling. Perfection is rare, but honesty, consistency, and clarity are non-negotiable. Part 3 then widens to the cousins of storytelling: comparison, analogy, and metaphor, and shows how these tools can dramatically boost understanding and engagement even when you're not spinning a full narrative. The author urges selecting words that stimulate the senses. Sensory qualifiers tend to land more deeply than flat wording, and vivid verbs, climb, soar, grab, seize, paint sharper pictures. He turns to literature and real-world examples, quoting Anthony Doerr's "All the Light We Cannot See" to illustrate how precise, imaginative wording can carry meaning beyond plain description. Metaphor and analogy become quick, efficient bridges for complex ideas. A love described as a battlefield or a house of cards can convey emotion and stakes instantly. He points to JFK's Moon speech as a masterclass in using metaphor, comparison, and concrete language to translate grand ambitions into something people can grasp and feel. He also notes the power of making large numbers tangible, comparing scales to familiar things like Manhattan or the idea that a lot of water could cover the Americas a foot deep. These devices aren't a replacement for storytelling but are powerful accelerants that help audiences connect deeply and emotionally with ideas. Yet storytelling isn't only a force for good. Part 2 also tempers ambition with caution in its dark side of storytelling. Acknowledging that stories can mislead when facts are bent or cherry-picked, Biesenbach emphasizes truth-telling as a moral obligation. Brains tend to organize information through existing worldviews, so people remember what fits their preconceptions and ignore the rest. The rule is simple: do no harm. Fables and legends about organizations can entertain, but spreading falsehoods or embellishments risks credibility. He cites the Romney campaign's momentum narrative and the Brian Williams controversy to illustrate how easily stories can shape perception even when the underlying facts are shaky. Memory itself is reconstructive. Retelling stories over time can warp details, and even widely held memories can be partially planted or reshaped by repetition. The guardrails are clear. Verify facts, avoid overplaying your own image, and document accounts or seek corroboration when you were there. The point isn't cynicism, it's trust protection, keeping your storytelling honest as you tell your own story. Part 3 moves into origins and structures that shape organizations' identities. Origin stories for companies are powerful because they introduce the founders, explain how and why the company began, and frame the core values and character of the people behind the brand. The core elements — character, goal, challenge, resolution, conflict, stakes, and emotional investment — form a template that aligns with a clear audience-oriented theme tied to the organization's goals or brand promise. Timelines are often less memorable than characters in drama because people remember people and moments more than dates. Real-world examples illuminate different paths. John Deere's tale of a humble origin and ongoing problem-solving, Subway's story of a teenager's dream and a partnership that enabled growth, Panera's origin weaving financial milestones into a practical narrative for investors, Trader Joe's emphasis on informal voice and values, Fitbit and Bonobos using concise, product, or problem-driven narratives that fit modern branding, Spirit Airlines and KPMG choosing not to publish a formal origin story. Leo Burnett embedding origin in everyday culture with symbolic visuals. The overarching message remains simple. Pick the medium, tone, and emphasis that match the audience's needs, because people are often more curious about who you are than about your corporate chronology. Chapter 12 translates origin storytelling into presentation technique. Stories should be the centerpiece of a presentation. Open with a story that grabs the audience's interest and weave stories throughout, rather than drowning listeners in data. Avoid story overload. Too many stories early on can overwhelm the audience and dilute impact. Structure should be flexible rather than dogmatic. For a 5-part talk, intro, 3 body sections, conclusion, a practical rule of thumb is around 5 stories, with the exact number depending on pacing and content. The opening should hook with relevance and emotion. The closing should echo the opening to deliver a satisfying arc. A clever callback technique helps. End with a twist or perspective that reframes the opening story, deepening understanding. The second half of the chapter focuses on delivery. Presence matters as much as content. Practice remains essential, but you must stay connected to material and audience in the moment to avoid sounding rehearsed. Energy, posture, voice, and facial expressions convey passion and clarity. Use vocal variety and physical storytelling to create a vivid stage picture. Time progression cues on stage help signal movement through past, present, and future, and staging co-stars or imagined interlocutors enrich dialogue and prevent flatness. In sum, great storytelling in presentations is a balance of powerful content and dynamic delivery. A strong story alone isn't enough, and polished delivery without meaningful content won't suffice. The right blend sustains attention and drives home the core message. Chapter 13 brings the focus home to telling your own story. Crafting a personal narrative that lands in job interviews, networking, and first meetings is a particular challenge. Alphabet soup syndrome, the boring, data-heavy, context-light self-introductions, needs a remedy. Turn career history into a story with conflict, stakes, and human interest. The antidote is to identify an implicit narrative, connecting the dots that tie your experiences together so your life's path reads as a coherent arc rather than a random sequence of jobs. He borrows from Dory Clark and Steve Jobs to emphasize that patterns emerge when you look backward, not forward, and that recognizing these patterns helps articulate your purpose and what you stand for. To reach this point, start with your career highlights, promotions, awards, rejections, and challenges, and ask what themes emerge, what skills you relied on, what traits helped you succeed, what others said about you, what you enjoyed most, and how those moments felt. The story he shares of his own journey, reaching a personal realization about what motivates him and how the love of performing threads through his life, signals a turning point. Storytelling can reveal who you are and why you do what you do. The excerpt ends with an unfinished line, the baby of the family, the natural center of attention, hinting at a deeper discovery that the author is moving toward. Storytelling can illuminate identity as much as it conveys information. Across these chapters, the through-line is consistent and practical. Storytelling is not a gimmick but a repeatable framework for communicating with authenticity and impact. It blends personal experience, precise language and imagery, and smart presentation mechanics to move listeners, whether they're customers, colleagues, interviewers, or a conference hall audience. You cultivate a store of stories, learn to tell them well, and tailor them to real people with real interests. You guard against distortions and manipulation by staying honest about your role and the truth of events, and you harness the power of narrative to connect, persuade, and inspire, not merely to dazzle. The book's philosophy isn't about theatrics for their own sake. It's about using story as a practical tool to illuminate, persuade, and humanize in every professional context, from founding a company to delivering a persuasive boardroom case, to describing your own journey in a way that resonates with others and opens doors for meaningful connections and opportunities. The book then pivots to Part 4, which shifts from mechanics to positioning yourself in the world through a personal brand and, later, through storytelling in moments of ceremony. Personal branding is presented as a practical, ethical instrument for standing out in a crowded world. A brand isn't a boastful declaration, it's a reputation built through consistent, audience-centered behavior. It's something others perceive and validate through your actions, your choices, and the stories you tell about yourself. To discover your brand, look outward and inward. What roles do others rely on you for? What patterns emerge in performance reviews, awards, or recognitions? What traits do people consistently attribute to you? From this outward vantage, the author introduces archetypes: the analyzer, the organizer, the innovator, the cool cucumber, the bulldog, to spark reflection about your own blend of strength. The branding process also involves aligning visible signals with deeper behavior. How you dress, where you work, and the projects you take on should reflect your core strengths because a brand is lived, not claimed. You steer your brand's evolution rather than letting others write it for you. Brand storytelling then translates into practical situations. How to present your brand in job interviews, sales conversations, and introductions. The voice should be authentic and the narrative coherent, emphasizing real, tangible outcomes your brand supports. You mine your own experiences for authentic material, accomplishments, problem-solving moments, turning points, and assemble them into a narrative that is credible and memorable. The author provides templates to help. Frame your strengths as a consistent, observable pattern. Let others quote or corroborate your claims when possible. Practice restraint in self-promotion while still owning your value. A common theme is that a brand takes time to mature, especially early in a career, and it should be revisited and revised as circumstances change. The core message is agency. You should guide your brand's development because letting it be defined by others makes it harder to live up to it. The practical application of brand storytelling extends to concrete contexts such as interviews, sales calls, and introductions. The brand narrative should be built around character, goal, and challenge, followed by a resolution that aligns with your professional trajectory. The reader is encouraged to mine personal experiences for authentic material, moments of achievement, problem-solving, and resilience, and to shape them into a concise, credible narrative. Consistency across channels reinforces a stable, recognizable image. The chapter shares sample brand stories that illustrate different personas and how those stories land in practice, always emphasizing humility and a focus on value rather than vanity. The message is clear. A brand is a living construct that evolves with you, but you should be the architect who steers its direction rather than letting reputation form by chance. Part 4 then turns to a special application of storytelling: the toast, the tribute, and the eulogy. Here, storytelling is framed as the most effective way to honor someone in moments of celebration or loss. The guidelines stress reducing a long list of adjectives to a handful of meaningful traits, selecting one core quality as the theme, and weaving a story that embodies that quality. Sensory details heighten impact, extraneous material is pruned, and a clear lesson remains at the heart of the narrative. Quotes can anchor the message, and timing matters. Toasts should be shorter than eulogies, and you should coordinate with the host on length. Delivery tips emphasize practice, the option to use notes, expectations for emotion, and strategies to stay calm under pressure. When relationships are complicated, honesty about flaws is allowed and even useful if you pivot toward constructive or forgiving conclusions. The overarching point is the ethical beauty of storytelling. It can illuminate truth without tipping into hero worship or gratuitous praise, offering detachment when necessary. The closing note is a call to action. Stand up, stand out. A well-told story, whether it's a personal brand narrative or a tribute, can cut through noise, resonate with listeners, and leave a lasting impression. The Gervais anecdote about pitching The Office becomes a parable about how passion, structure, and audience-focused storytelling can convert skepticism into belief. 3 simple elements: character, goal, and challenge are enough to begin, with the option to explore deeper or more elaborate structures if you want. The author urges readers to seek out stories constantly, to be original, to bring genuine passion, and to be generous with their own experiences as a way to connect with others. The section closes with a bold message. Use story to define who you are, to clarify what you stand for, and to ensure your voice is heard in a crowded world.